Let's talk about Zine Month 2026. So, Zine Month happens pretty much every year. A bunch of creators, make really small pamphlet-sized games. First year we did like Afterworld. Honestly, I was in college, no idea why anything was gonna happen, but it worked out and we funded. So sick. My co-dev Chase, he ran a solo journaling game the year afterward. That worked pretty well. And then last year, my now friend Ethan Yen, we did Prequel, which smashed what I'd done before. This was like $500. I think Chase had his funding goal here for like $300. Yeah, our funding goal here was $3,000. We ended up, ended up funding like $7,000 on top of that. Absolutely insane. Like, this is kind of like the timeline we had for doing things for Prequel, and we started back in April. It is halfway through October now, and not even back in April. Like, Ethan started working on Prequel like July the year before. We are at least 4 to 6 months behind what our starting point was last year. So we certainly cannot do anything as crazy. I mean, Ethan's been in the industry for like 3 more years than us. He's got way more friends. We are not going to be the case this year. I have the smallest of followings. Chase does not use social media. This year, the tagline is sensible. Sensible, clean, fun. Second off, Backerkit. Backerkit is jumping in, and they are going to be running an event for Zine Month. Kickstarters is called Zine Quest. Majority of people will fund their project on Zine Quest with Kickstarter, right? Backerkit jumping in is actually pretty cool. One, like, for 2 reasons. A lot of people have issues with Kickstarter, their business practices, how the platform is basically just like a mill for people kind of working on it. And then second off, like, right now, Kickstarter has a subset of their workers which are kind of in a union. They're on strike right now. They do say, like, hey, like, keep supporting people. Don't like boycott the use of platforms because we're striking. But I think it's probably going to be another reason. I doubt this strike is going to keep going to February, but like, people are not happy with Kickstarter and they've been looking for alternatives. Backerkit coming in here and basically doing their own Zine Quest is pretty big. Backerkit's been running these types of events for like the past year and a half, and they've been going pretty well. Pocketopia, which is like an event Backerkit ran the month after, like in March. That went pretty well. Like, I mean, like, raised a good bit of funds. It's like 60 projects going. So like, to actually do the Backerkit projects, you have to kind of apply in and be accepted. So it's not as much of an open call. Mothership Month, which is just making supplements for the Mothership game system, is going on right now. They've got all of their projects funded, over raising on their funding goal. They've made a good case for people using their platform over other platforms, especially when it comes to like these types of events. I will not be surprised to see a bunch of people jumping on over to Backerkit instead of Kickstarter this year. But like, let's actually talk about what's going on in the game. But just due to the time frame, it has to be smaller in scope. So we had a few different ideas. The first one was a game I've been thinking about for a good bit, which is like a game about, if you have like Stranger Things, like the small town and like the hidden government research lab that nobody knows about. Something has happened, some weird shit. Like a big inspiration here is like, the Tales from the Loop TV show where a bunch of weird shit is happening. You kind of write about what you think happened and then wait you start seeing stuff doesn't match up, and you actually played the journaling game with someone else, and you pass it back and forth, and you have one person redacts out the different things, like this being like the main mechanic of like one person crossing stuff out of like, hey, this is not actually true, this is not actually in your memory, and like you slowly realizing you're either like one, crazy, or two, there's been like an MIB like mind wipe scenario. That feeling of kind of like losing your mind slowly but surely. The second one was one RPG that I found I became a big fan of is like Beak, Feather, and Bone, where you kind of make a map of a town, you fill it in, and you fill in all the different places. That's pretty cool for like a map, but like when you have like an actual city, I feel like it's a shame not getting to use like the actual stuff that's in your own city, in your own town. This idea was basically like, oh, like let's build a game that uses Google Maps, and you can kind of pick and choose stuff in your own city. And then it's kind of, you get that feeling of like, you know, The Wolf Among Us or like Percy Jackson, where it's like this hidden world. Oh, the shopkeeper is a troll, or, you know, there's a magical fairy black market snorting pixie dust in the back of a restaurant, you know, that type of shit. Third one being like, you know, Severance, awesome show, very cool this past year. Really wanted to do a game in that kind of setting where it's like corporate, kind of like some like Incognito Inc. like inside job vibes of like, you know, corporate humor, you know, almost like The Office, combining that with some elements, you know, Blueprint's awesome game this year. That feeling from like Severance of like, oh, like what are all these different like weird departments, and like you're making a map between it. There was an idea of like, oh, maybe like let's make this like a more like character focus, because like we were big fans of like Yesba's Bread and Breakfast, and like how, you know, playing as like characters with kind of your own motivations and your own storylines would kind of be a cool angle to take. The kind of corporate horror one, I think like the premise is super cool, and like everyone is so Severance pilled, I'm sure, but like they're just, it seemed a bit bigger, and like there's a lot of questions of like what you actually do in the game. Acted one, I think like the mechanic of like crossing shit out is like very sick and very cool. I think is very, you know, very cool and could lead to a lot of cool storylines, but like what we weren't quite sure how we were going to pull it off. There was a lot of like questions of what we were going to do. The map making one, like I think it struck a good balance of one, like actually using Google Maps to like make a world building. Using Google Maps in a world building game seemed like such a cool idea. And since we already had these very strong inspirations in like Beak, Feather, and Bone, like we knew in the 2 to 3 months we had, we could figure it out, you know, kind of like it was within like shooting distance of what we could do. What are we aiming for like with this game? Feeling of like the hidden world, you know, Harry Potter, where the wizards kind of like living alongside, you know, everyone who's non-magical. So you once you kind of pull back the curtain, you know, and you see that there's kind of a whole other, you know, society behind the covers of what, you know, you actually see in your day-to-day as like a regular person. And then two, just like, you know, we're doing stuff in cities, and I really wanted it to feel natural. So this was an experiment that, you know, got ran in Tokyo, where basically they used mushrooms to try to like map out how to kind of overhaul the Tokyo like metro lines. Built this really natural network of like how these spots connect. Really wanted to try and like capture that feeling, that natural like growth feeling of like a city, building places that feel natural in the area. Like there's a reason like why different people would be in different places, or different resources would be in different places, that makes sense with like an actual like society. Pretty kind of like from, you know, the Wolf Among Us side of like, hey, like magical creatures, they've been here for a while, like let's find ways to like build relationships, build rivalries, build, you know, history that like it feels like, especially like if you decide to like maybe play a campaign in these spaces, that everyone's connected, everyone knows each other, not necessarily like a small town feel, but like, you know, the fact that we're building characters that are in a community together. Core loop like is very much around like, hey, basically you're gonna like take turns building out in the city. Each have like your own hub that you start with, and then using, you know, the measurement tools in Google Maps, building out new locations, but making sure they're close enough that it makes sense about what's going on. Every player to play their own community and their own like faction, right? So like these factions at play, like in Beak, Feather, and Bone, you kind of have like, you know, you have the soldiers, you have the mages, the travelers, the ranchers, and they're basically just like this little bird illustration, and there's not anything else to it. Instead of like, you know, the soldiers and the mages, we're trying to like look at like supernatural communities, which is like, oh, like there's a community which is like the, you know, the pantheon or the myths, which is like stuff from mythology. Maybe you're, you know, the Greek gods like Percy Jackson. Maybe it's like, you know, Loki and Thor, the Asgardians. You know, you've got the fables, which are like fairy tale creatures. So, you know, the Wolf Among Us being a big inspiration, Shrek, the Wendigo, stuff like that are more like modern stories or like characters being their own thing. Like maybe there's an angle here for like internet monsters like Slender Man, but it's a big question. Blood, which is just going to be, you know, vampires, werewolves, stuff that's more like spooky, more like Vampire the Masquerade. The idea is basically it's like, hey, like we are players, we're going to play as these different factions, and you're going to build out your community, you know, across the city. The thing with Beak, Feather, Bone is like you have this real nice map that you can kind of place things in, but like if we're getting into like individual areas, like there's a lot of buildings to choose from, so you're never going to run out. So maybe we're going to make it so like you're going to get a whole neighborhood instead of just an individual location. Google has built-in categories for like automotive, business, culture, education, you know, health and wellness. Maybe we can use these just as a starting point. I like the idea of community where it's like, you know, stuff like theaters, gyms, places, you know, people will actually show up and, you know, congregate. It has free questions every time you create like a new location, and it asks you Beak, Feather, and Bone. Unless we want to find some weird alliteration, we can't necessarily do this one-to-one. Like maybe we go more to line of the Quiet Year where it's like, hey, every card that we use, every card that the player is pulling, like is its own question. But that's a lot. That's a lot to handle. But the one thing like I want to try to get across is from like Men in Black, where, you know, like everything seems like a regular pawn shop, but like for people who know and like actually live in these magical communities, you know, like, oh, what's beneath the surface? So what do like the non-magical people know about this place, and what do the magical people know about this place? Like trying to find ways to like set that dynamic up is like, we only have like 3 months, so this is gonna be rapid fast. These next 3 weeks, we are throwing together the rough draft of everything, and we are going to be playtesting it end of this month. It's going to be a fast and fun project to kind of like build a fantasy world using Google Maps in your own city, in your own community. Is super sick. And I'm excited to see where things go. That's all I've got with it. If you want to see more, you can, you know, follow along either on YouTube or Twitter or on TikTok, wherever this shows up for you. But yeah, this is going to be a blast. I am super excited to see.